The clock on the wall showed 1:47 a.m. when Jake's phone started buzzing. He was sitting at his kitchen table, staring at a pile of bills that seemed to grow bigger every day. His work boots sat by the door, still covered in dust from yesterday's job. The phone kept ringing, cutting through the quiet night like a knife. Jake rubbed his tired eyes and picked up the phone. The number wasn't one he knew, but these days he answered every call. Work was work, no matter what time it came. Hello? His voice was rough from exhaustion. Is this Jake Thompson? The handyman? The woman's voice was soft, almost like she was afraid to speak too loud. Yeah, that's me. What can I do for you? I know it's very late, but I have an emergency. My bedroom light stopped working and I really need it fixed tonight. I can pay triple your normal rate. Jake sat up straight. Triple rate? That would be enough to buy groceries for a week. Maybe even enough to make a dent in the rent money he owed. Ma'am, I have to ask, is this really an emergency? It's almost 2 a.m. There was silence on the other end. Then he heard something that made his chest tighten. She was crying. Soft, quiet tears that she was trying to hide. I'm sorry, she whispered. I know it sounds crazy, but I haven't been able to sleep in my bedroom for weeks. The light went out and I can't be in the dark anymore. Jake looked around his small apartment. The eviction notice sat folded on the counter where he'd left it that morning. His landlord wanted the money by Friday, or Jake would be sleeping in his truck. His daughter Lucy needed new school supplies and he'd already told her they'd have to wait until next month. Where are you located? He asked. Hillcrest Drive, number 847. Jake knew that area. Big houses, fancy cars, people who had more money than they knew what to do with. He'd done a few jobs there before, and the tips were usually good. But at 2 a.m, something felt off. I'll be there in 30 minutes, he said anyway. But I'll need payment up front. Of course. Thank you so much. You have no idea what this means to me. Jake hung up and stared at the phone for a moment. Every smart part of his brain told him this was a bad idea. Late-night calls to rich neighborhoods usually meant trouble. But the desperate sound in that woman's voice reminded him of how he felt when the lights got shut off last winter. Sometimes people just needed help, no matter how much money they had. He pulled on his work boots and grabbed his toolbox from the closet. The metal box was scratched and dented from years of use, but every tool inside was clean and sharp. His dad had taught him that a good worker takes care of his tools and they'll take care of him. The truck coughed to life on the 3rd try. Jake patted the dashboard like he always did. Come on, old girl. One more job. As he drove through the empty streets, Jake thought about how different his life had become. 3 months ago, he was working steady construction, making good money, planning to save up for a better apartment. Then the company lost its biggest contract and half the crew got laid off. Jake was one of them. Since then, he'd been picking up whatever work he could find. Emergency repairs, small jobs, anything that paid cash. It wasn't enough to cover all the bills, but it kept food on the table and gas in the truck. The radio played soft country music as he drove past sleeping houses. Porch lights glowed like tiny beacons in the darkness. Jake wondered what it would be like to live in one of those houses, to have enough money that you didn't check your bank account before buying coffee. Hillcrest Drive was a different world. The houses here weren't just big, they were massive. Perfect lawns, expensive cars in the driveways, security systems blinking red on every door. Jake felt his old truck stick out like a sore thumb as he drove slowly down the street, looking for number 847. When he found it, he had to whistle under his breath. The house was like something from a movie. 3 stories tall with white columns and windows that sparkled even in the dark. An iron gate surrounded the property, but it was open, like she was waiting for him. Jake parked in the circular driveway and grabbed his toolbox. His boots crunched on the gravel as he walked to the front door. Before he could knock, the door opened. The woman standing there wasn't what he expected. She was older, maybe in her 60s, with silver hair that looked like she'd been running her hands through it. She wore a silk robe over pajamas and her eyes were red from crying. You came, she said, and her voice was full of relief. I wasn't sure you would. I said I'd be here. Jake shifted his toolbox to his other hand. I'm Jake. I'm Mrs. Catherine Wells. Please come in. The inside of the house took Jake's breath away. The ceiling was so high he had to crane his neck to see it. A crystal chandelier hung in the entryway, throwing sparkles of light across marble floors. Paintings in gold frames lined the walls and everything looked expensive and untouched. But as Mrs. Wells led him through the house, Jake noticed something else. It was quiet. Not just regular house quiet, but empty quiet. Like no one had laughed or talked in these rooms for a long time. "The bedroom is upstairs," Mrs. Wells said, her voice echoing in the big space. "I should warn you, the house is quite large. I hope you don't mind the walk." As they climbed the winding staircase, Jake's boots made soft sounds on the thick carpet. He noticed family photos on the walls. Mrs. Wells with a man who must have been her husband. Pictures of what looked like grown children. Grandkids, maybe. "Big house for one person," Jake said, then immediately regretted it. That wasn't his business. Mrs. Wells stopped walking for a moment. "Yes," she said quietly. "It is." The bedroom was at the end of a long hallway. When Mrs. Wells opened the door, Jake could see the problem right away. A beautiful crystal chandelier hung from the ceiling, but it was completely dark. The room felt cold and unwelcoming without its light. "It just stopped working 3 weeks ago," Mrs. Wells explained. "I called an electrician, but he said he couldn't come until next week. I tried to wait, but—" She didn't finish the sentence, but Jake understood. Some problems couldn't wait, even if they seemed small to other people. "Let me take a look," he said, setting down his toolbox. "Should have you back in business in no time." As he set up his ladder and started examining the fixture, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this job was about more than just a broken light. But right now, fixing things was what he did best. Everything else could wait until morning. Jake climbed up the ladder and got to work on the chandelier. The crystal pieces clinked softly as he moved them aside to check the wiring. Mrs. Wells stood below, watching every move he made like her life depended on it. "You can sit down if you want," Jake said, not looking down from his work. "This might take a while." "I'd rather stand," she replied. "I haven't sat in this room for weeks." That caught Jake's attention. He glanced down at her. "Weeks? Where do you sleep?" "The guest room down the hall." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I know it sounds silly." Jake tested the connections with his voltage meter. Everything looked normal so far. "Doesn't sound silly to me. My daughter won't sleep without her nightlight. Says the dark makes her think too much." Mrs. Wells looked up at him with surprise. "You have a daughter?" "Lucy, she's 12. Jake smiled despite himself. "Smart as a whip, that one. Wants to be a doctor when she grows up? That's wonderful. Where is she tonight?" "With her mom. They live across town." Jake didn't mention that his ex-wife had remarried someone who could give Lucy things he couldn't. A stable home, new clothes, a college fund. It still stung even though he knew it was better for Lucy. The silence stretched between them as Jake worked. The wiring looked fine, which meant the problem was probably in the fixture itself. He started checking each bulb socket one by one. "Can I ask you something?" Mrs. Wells said suddenly. "Sure. Why did you really come here tonight?" Most people would have said no to a call this late. Jake paused his work. "That was a good question. Honestly, I need the money. But also—" He looked down at her tired face. "You sounded like someone who really needed help." Mrs. Wells nodded slowly. "I did need help. I do need help." There was something in her voice that made Jake pay attention. He'd heard that tone before from his own mouth during the worst days after the divorce. It was the sound of someone drowning. "You want to talk about it?" he asked, going back to checking the sockets. "You don't want to hear an old woman's problem? Try me. I've got time." Mrs. Wells was quiet for so long that Jake thought she'd changed her mind. Then she started talking so softly he had to strain to hear her. "My husband died 2 years ago. Heart attack. He was working late in his study and I found him the next morning." She took a shaky breath. "We'd been married for 43 years. This was our bedroom. Our bed. Our everything." Jake found the problem. A burned-out main connection in the fixture's base. He'd need to rewire it completely. "That's a long time to be with someone," he said gently. "The longest part of my life. After he died, I tried to keep sleeping here, but every night I'd wake up and reach for him. The empty space next to me felt like a hole I might fall into." "So you moved to the guest room?" "Yes. But then the light burned out. And somehow that made it worse. Like the room was really dead now, not just empty." Jake worked carefully, stripping the old wires and preparing new ones. His hands moved automatically while his mind processed what she was telling him. "What about your kids? The people in those pictures downstairs?" Mrs. Wells laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "David lives in London. He calls once a month if I'm lucky. Rebecca is in Seattle with her family. She sends Christmas cards, and that's rough. They have their own lives. I understand that. But this house feels so big when you're the only one in it. Jake could hear the loneliness in every word. He thought about his own small apartment, how quiet it got when Lucy wasn't there. But at least he had neighbors, co-workers to talk to during the day. Mrs. Wells had a mansion full of nothing but memories. What about friends? He asked. Most of them were couples friends. After Charles died, the invitations stopped coming. I think I reminded them of what they might lose someday. Jake finished the rewiring and started putting the fixture back together. That's not fair. Life rarely is. Mrs. Wells moved closer to the ladder. What about you? Besides your daughter, do you have family? My parents died when I was young. My brother lives in Texas. We don't talk much. Jake tested the connection carefully. Mostly it's just me and Lucy when I get to see her. Do you ever get lonely? The question hit Jake harder than he expected. He paused, a crystal piece halfway to its spot on the chandelier. Yeah, more than I like to admit. It's strange, isn't it? How you can be surrounded by people during the day but feel completely alone at night. Jake nodded, even though she couldn't see it from below. That was exactly how it felt. During work hours, he was busy, focused, useful. But at night, in his quiet apartment, the weight of everything came crashing down. The bills, the uncertainty, the fear that he was failing at everything that mattered. The worst part, Mrs. Wells continued, is that everyone thinks having money means you can't be sad. Like a big house and expensive things should be enough to fill the empty spaces. Money doesn't fix everything, Jake said, though I'll admit having enough of it would solve some of my problems. What kind of problems? Jake wasn't sure why he was telling a stranger all this, but something about the late hour and the honest conversation made it feel okay. I got laid off 3 months ago. Been doing odd jobs since then, but it's not enough. My landlord wants me out by Friday if I can't pay rent. Oh no, what will you do? Find something, I guess. Always do. Jake secured the last crystal and started climbing down the ladder. Lucy doesn't know how bad things are. Her mom thinks I'm irresponsible enough as it is. Mrs. Wells was quiet while Jake set up to test the light. He flipped the wall switch and the chandelier blazed to life, sending sparkles of light dancing across the walls and ceiling. The room was transformed instantly from a dark, cold space into something warm and beautiful. Mrs. Wells gasped and put her hand to her mouth. Tears started flowing down her cheeks, but this time they looked different. Happy tears, maybe, or relief. Oh my, she whispered. I'd forgotten how beautiful it was. The light changed everything. Jake could see details he'd missed in the darkness. Fresh flowers on the nightstand. Books stacked neatly on both sides of the bed. A photo of Mrs. Wells and her husband on their wedding day. It's a nice room, Jake said simply. Mrs. Wells walked slowly to the bed and sat down on the edge, looking up at the sparkling chandelier. I haven't sat here in so long. Charles always said this light made me look like a movie star. Smart man. She smiled through her tears. He would have liked you, I think. He always respected people who worked with their hands, who could fix things. Jake started packing up his tools, feeling oddly reluctant to leave. The job was done, but something about this room, this moment, felt important. Well, your light's working now. Should be good for years. How much do I owe you? Jake did the math in his head. His normal rate times 3 like she'd promised. It would cover his rent with money left over. $300. Mrs. Wells nodded and left the room. Jake could hear her footsteps going downstairs. He took one last look around the bedroom, now bright and welcoming again. Sometimes the smallest repairs made the biggest difference. When Mrs. Wells came back, she handed him an envelope. Thank you, she said, for more than just the light. Jake tucked the envelope into his jacket pocket without looking inside. Happy to help. As he headed for the door, Mrs. Wells followed him. At the top of the stairs, she stopped. Jake? Her voice was small again, like when she'd first called. Would you mind staying for a cup of coffee? I know it's late, but I'm not ready for the dark yet. Jake looked at Mrs. Wells standing at the top of the stairs. Her eyes were hopeful but scared, like she was asking for something she'd never asked for before. The smart thing would be to say no. It was almost 3 a.m. He had another job at 8, and he barely knew this woman. But something in her face reminded him of Lucy when she was little and afraid of thunderstorms. Coffee sounds good, he said. Mrs. Wells smiled, and for the first time that night she looked truly relieved. Follow me. The kitchen is downstairs. The kitchen was bigger than Jake's entire apartment. Marble countertops, fancy appliances that probably cost more than his truck, and a breakfast table that could seat 8 people. But Mrs. Wells moved around the space like she was uncomfortable in it, like she was playing house in someone else's home. "I have to warn you," she said, starting the coffee maker. "I'm not much of a cook anymore." Charles always handled breakfast. "Coffee's perfect." Jake sat down at the table and watched her work. "This is some kitchen. We used to entertain a lot. Dinner parties, holiday gatherings. Charles loved having people over. She got 2 mugs from a cabinet. Now I mostly eat cereal and takeout." The coffee maker gurgled to life, filling the quiet kitchen with noise. Mrs. Wells sat across from Jake, folding her hands on the table like she was in a business meeting. "I want to apologize," she said suddenly. "For what?" "For calling you so late. For crying on the phone. For asking you to stay. I know it's not normal." Jake shook his head. "Lady, normal is overrated. Besides, you're paying me well enough to drink coffee at 3 a.m. That made her smile again. "You're very kind. Just honest." The coffee finished brewing and Mrs. Wells got up to pour it. "Can I ask you something now?" "Of course. Why me?" "There are plenty of electricians in town. Probably some who would have come out tonight for the right price." Mrs. Wells set a steaming mug in front of him and sat back down. "I found your number on a bulletin board at the grocery store. Your ad was handwritten, not printed like the others. It said Jake Thompson, honest work, fair prices." Something about that felt real. Jake remembered writing that card. He'd made 20 of them at the kitchen table using his best handwriting. Not much of a marketing budget. It was perfect. All the other ads had websites and logos and promised things like luxury service and executive treatment. I just wanted someone who would fix my light and treat me like a person. The coffee was good, strong and hot. Jake wrapped his hands around the mug and let the warmth soak in. "So what's your story? I mean, before tonight. What did you do?" "I was a teacher for 30 years. Elementary school, 2nd grade. Mrs. Wells's face lit up. "I loved those kids. 7-year-olds don't care if you have money or what kind of car you drive. They just want someone to listen to them and help them learn. That's a good job, important." "I thought so. After I retired, Charles and I were going to travel. See all the places we talked about but never had time for. We made lists, bought guidebooks." She stared into her coffee. The guidebooks are still in his study, bookmarked and ready to go. Jake thought about his own dreams that got put on hold. The contracting business he wanted to start someday. The house with a yard where Lucy could have a dog. It's hard when plans change. What about you? Did you always want to be a handyman? Actually, I wanted to be an engineer. Had a scholarship to college and everything. Jake took a sip of coffee. But then my girlfriend got pregnant senior year of high school. We did the right thing, got married, and I went to work instead of school. That must have been difficult. Best and worst thing that ever happened to me. I gave up college, but I got Lucy. She's worth 10 degrees. Jake smiled. The marriage didn't work out, but Lucy, she's everything. Mrs. Wells nodded knowingly. Children change everything, don't they? Even when they're not around anymore. Your kids, are they really as busy as you said? Or are they just... Jake struggled for a polite way to say it. Avoiding me? Mrs. Wells finished. A little of both, I think. After Charles died, I wasn't very good company. I was angry and sad and probably not fun to be around. They tried for a while, but grief isn't easy to watch. It's not easy to live through either. No, it's not. She looked around the big kitchen. This house has so many memories. Every room, every corner. Sometimes I think I should sell it, move somewhere smaller. But then I'd be giving up the last place where Charles and I were happy. Jake understood that feeling. He still drove by the house where he and his ex-wife had lived with Lucy, even though it made him sad. Some places held pieces of your heart, even when they hurt to remember. Can I tell you something? Mrs. Wells said quietly. Sure. You're the first person I've had a real conversation with in months. The grocery store clerk says hello. The mailman waves, but nobody actually talks anymore. I'd forgotten what it felt like. That hit Jake hard. He thought about his own days, how he moved from job to job without really connecting with anyone. Even at Lucy's school events, he was polite but distant, aware that the other parents had better clothes and nicer cars. I know what you mean, he said. Sometimes I go whole days without talking to another adult. It makes you feel invisible, doesn't it? Yeah, like you don't quite exist. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking coffee and listening to the old house settle around them. Jake checked the clock on the stove. It was almost 4 a.m., but he wasn't tired anymore. Something about this conversation felt important, like it was fixing something in both of them. "Jake?" Mrs. Wells said finally. "Yeah." The light in the bedroom wasn't really broken. Jake looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean, it was working fine until 3 weeks ago, but I'm the one who turned it off. I unscrewed the main wire myself because I couldn't stand looking at the empty bed anymore." Jake stared at her. "You disconnected your own chandelier?" "I did. But then I couldn't figure out how to fix it, and I was too embarrassed to call someone and admit what I'd done." She looked down at her hands. "I've been sitting in the dark for weeks, but tonight I just couldn't take it anymore. So you called me?" "I called you. And you came, even though it was crazy late and I was a stranger and you had every reason to say no." Jake thought about the repair he'd just finished. The burned connection he'd found wasn't from old wiring. It was from someone pulling wires apart without knowing how to do it safely. "You could have been electrocuted." "I know. I was desperate. Mrs. Wells. Catherine. Please call me Catherine. Catherine, why are you telling me this?" She looked up at him with tears in her eyes again. "Because you fixed more than my light tonight. You listened to me. You treated me like I mattered. And I wanted you to know that coming here, staying for coffee, talking to me like a friend, that wasn't part of the job you got paid for. That was just you being kind." Jake felt something tight in his chest loosen. "You matter, Catherine. And for what it's worth, this has been the best part of my week." Outside, the sky was starting to lighten just a little. Dawn was still hours away, but the deepest part of the night was over. Jake looked at this woman across from him, who had everything money could buy but had been living in darkness for weeks. "Can I ask you one more thing?" he said. "Anything. What are you going to do tomorrow? And the day after that?" Catherine was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know. I haven't thought past tonight in a long time. Maybe that's where we start." 3 weeks later, Jake's phone rang again. This time it was noon on a Tuesday, and he recognized Catherine's number immediately. "Jake, I hope I'm not bothering you." "Not at all. What's going on?" "Well, there's a squeaky door in the library that's driving me crazy. And maybe you could look at the kitchen faucet while you're here." "It drips," Jake smiled. Since that first night, Catherine had called him 4 times for small repairs around the house. A loose floorboard, a wobbly table leg, a cabinet door that wouldn't close right. Each job took about an hour, but somehow he always ended up staying for 3. "I'll be there this afternoon," he said. "Wonderful. And Jake? Lucy is welcome to come along if she wants. I have that art set we talked about." That was new. Jake had mentioned that Lucy loved to draw, and Catherine had insisted on buying her a professional art kit. Jake had tried to refuse, but Catherine had a way of making her generosity sound practical instead of charitable. She'd love that. Her mom's dropping her off at 3. When Jake arrived at the mansion, Lucy was already chattering excitedly in the passenger seat. She'd been curious about Mrs. Wells ever since Jake had mentioned her, and the promise of new art supplies had sealed the deal. Catherine met them at the door, and Jake watched as she bent down to Lucy's level immediately. "You must be Lucy. Your dad has told me so much about you." "He told me about you too." "You have a really big house?" Catherine laughed. "I do. Would you like to see it while your dad fixes things?" Lucy looked up at Jake for permission. He nodded, and she took Catherine's hand without hesitation. Kids had a way of seeing through to people's hearts, and apparently Lucy had decided Catherine was safe. While they explored downstairs, Jake got to work on the library door. The squeak was coming from old hinges that just needed oil, but he took his time with it. These small jobs had become something he looked forward to, a break from the bigger construction projects he'd been picking up around town. His phone buzzed with a text from his ex-wife. "Lucy's grades are amazing this semester. Whatever you're doing, keep it up." Jake smiled. Lucy had been happier lately, more confident. She talked about her conversations with Catherine, how smart and interesting she was, how she knew about art and books and places around the world. "Dad?" Lucy appeared in the doorway. "Mrs. Catherine wants to know if you'd like some lunch." "Mrs. Catherine?" She said I could call her that. "Is that okay?" Jake found Catherine in the kitchen, setting plates on the breakfast table. She'd made sandwiches and cut up fruit, simple food, but arranged like it mattered. "I hope you don't mind," she said. "I haven't cooked for anyone in so long." "This is great. Thank you." Lucy climbed into a chair and immediately started talking about the art room Catherine had shown her. She has real oil paints and canvases and everything. And she said she used to paint with her husband. Charles loved art, Catherine explained. He wasn't very good at it, but he enjoyed trying. We set up a studio in the sunroom, but I haven't touched it since he died, Lucy finished matter-of-factly. Kids didn't dance around hard truths the way adults did. Catherine nodded. Yes. My dad says when people die, the things they loved don't die with them. Maybe the art stuff misses being used. Jake looked at his daughter with amazement. Sometimes she said things that cut right to the heart of everything. Catherine's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. You know what, Lucy? I think you're absolutely right. After lunch, Catherine showed Lucy the art supplies she'd bought. Jake tried again to protest, but Catherine waved him off. I'm a retired teacher, Jake. Let me spoil a bright student. While Lucy explored her new paints, Jake finished the small repairs. But when he was done, instead of packing up to leave, he found himself sitting in Catherine's living room, watching Lucy draw at the coffee table. She's talented, Catherine said quietly. Gets it from her mom. I can barely draw stick figures. Talent comes in many forms. You fix things. That's an art, too. Over the following weeks, this became their routine. Catherine would find small things that needed fixing. Jake would come over with Lucy, and they'd end up spending the whole afternoon together. Catherine started cooking again, real meals that filled the big house with good smells. Lucy would work on art projects while Jake and Catherine talked about everything and nothing. One day, while Jake was replacing a loose tile in the bathroom, he overheard Lucy and Catherine in the kitchen. Do you ever get lonely? Lucy asked in that direct way kids had. I used to, Catherine said, but not so much anymore. What about you? Sometimes. When Dad's working and I'm at Mom's house. She's really busy with my stepdad and the baby. Jake paused his work. Lucy had never told him she felt left out at her mom's house. That must be hard, Catherine said gently. It's okay, but I like coming here. You actually listen when I talk and you ask questions about my drawings. Your drawings are fascinating. You see things differently than most people. Dad says that too. He says different isn't bad. Your dad is a very smart man. Jake smiled and went back to work, but his chest felt warm. It meant everything to hear that Lucy felt comfortable here, that Catherine genuinely enjoyed her company. A few days later, Jake was under Catherine's kitchen sink fixing a pipe when she said something that made him stop what he was doing. Jake, can I ask you something personal? Shoot. How much do you usually make in a month? With all your jobs combined? Jake crawled out from under the sink and looked at her. Why? Just wondering. You don't have to answer if you don't want to. Jake thought about it. Catherine had been nothing but honest with him. On a good month? Maybe $2,500. Bad month, $1,500. Why? Catherine nodded like she was filing that information away. No reason. Just curious about how different trades work. The next week, Jake got a call from a number he didn't recognize. Is this Jake Thompson? I got your number from Catherine Wells. I need some work done on my kitchen, and she said you were the best handyman in the city. 3 more calls came that week. All referrals from Catherine. All wealthy homeowners in her neighborhood who suddenly needed repairs and renovations. When Jake asked Catherine about it, she shrugged. I may have mentioned to a few friends that I know an excellent handyman who does beautiful work. Catherine, what? I can't recommend good service when I see it. But Jake knew what she was doing. She was quietly making sure he had steady work, good paying work, without making it feel like charity. She was giving him a way to stand on his own feet while still being his friend. That night, after a particularly good day of work, Jake called Catherine. Want some company for dinner? Lucy's with her mom, and I thought maybe I could cook for you for once. I'd love that, Catherine said, and Jake could hear the smile in her voice. As he drove to her house with groceries in the passenger seat, Jake realized something had changed. He wasn't going there because Catherine needed him to fix something. He was going because they'd become friends. Real friends. And for the first time in months, the future felt bright. 6 months after that first late-night phone call, Jake stood in his new workshop, looking at the sign his friend had just finished painting. Thompson Home Solutions in clean blue letters on white wood. It wasn't fancy, but it was his. The workshop was actually the converted garage behind the small house he'd been able to rent in a decent neighborhood, not far from Catherine's mansion, but worlds away from his old cramped apartment. Lucy had her own room here, decorated with artwork she'd created during her afternoons with Catherine. Jake's phone rang, and he smiled when he saw the caller ID. Thompson Home Solutions? This is Jake. Very professional. Catherine's voice was warm with laughter. I have an emergency. What's wrong? I'm trying to hang a painting in the front hallway and I can't reach the right spot. I need someone tall, Jake chuckled. Over the months, Catherine's emergencies had become less about actual repairs and more about having reasons to see each other. Not that either of them minded. I'll be right over. Lucy's at art class, but she'll be by later. Perfect. I'm making her favorite cookies. 20 minutes later, Jake walked into Catherine's house without knocking. That had taken some getting used to. The easy familiarity they'd developed. Catherine treated him like family now, and he'd learned to accept it. He found her in the hallway, standing on a step stool with a hammer in one hand and a large painting in the other. Get down from there before you fall, Jake said, taking the hammer and painting from her. I'm perfectly capable of hanging a picture. I know you are, but I'm here now, so let me do it. Jake looked at the painting. It was a watercolor of a garden, soft blues and greens that seemed to capture sunlight. This is beautiful. Is it new? Catherine blushed slightly. I painted it last week. Lucy convinced me to try the art studio again. You painted this? Jake held it up to get a better look. Catherine, this is amazing. It's not that good. It's incredible. You should be proud of this. Jake hung the painting carefully, adjusting it until it was perfectly level. Catherine stepped back to look at it, and Jake watched her face. There was something different about her lately. The sadness was still there, but it wasn't the only thing anymore. Charles would have loved it, she said softly. I bet he would. But the important thing is that you love it. Catherine nodded. I'm starting to remember what it feels like to create something instead of just missing what's gone. They walked to the kitchen, where Catherine had been baking. The smell of chocolate chip cookies filled the air, making the big house feel warm and alive. Jake, I want to talk to you about something, Catherine said, pouring 2 cups of coffee. Sounds serious. It is, a little. Catherine sat down across from him. I've been thinking about the future, about what I want to do with the rest of my life. Jake felt a small flutter of worry. Okay, I want to start a foundation, something to help people like you, skilled workers who want to start their own businesses but need help getting started. That's a great idea. I was hoping you might help me figure out how to do it right. You understand what people really need, what the real barriers are. Jake stared at her. You want me to help you start a foundation? I want you to help me run it. As a partner, not an employee. You'd keep your business, of course, but maybe work with me on this too. Before Jake could respond, they heard the front door open and Lucy's voice calling out, Mrs. Catherine, I'm here. In the kitchen, sweetheart. Lucy burst through the doorway, still wearing her paint-splattered art class apron. She'd grown taller over the months, more confident, and her artwork had improved dramatically under Catherine's encouragement. I finished my painting for the school art show, Lucy announced. And guess what? Mrs. Peterson wants to display it in the main hallway. That's wonderful. Catherine hugged her. I'm so proud of you. Jake watched them together and felt his chest tighten with emotion. Lucy had flourished under Catherine's attention. She'd gone from a shy kid who doubted herself to a confident young artist who believed she could do anything. Dad, did you tell Mrs. Catherine about the house yet? Lucy asked. What house? Catherine looked between them. Jake had been planning to wait for the right moment, but Lucy had never been good at keeping secrets. I made an offer on a place. Nothing fancy, but it has a big backyard and a good school district. Jake, that's wonderful. Where? Actually, it's about 10 minutes from here. Lucy found it on the internet and fell in love with it. Catherine's face lit up. So you'll be staying in the neighborhood? If everything goes through, yeah. Lucy bounced excitedly. And Mrs. Catherine, Dad said maybe you could help me design a garden in the backyard. He said you know about plants and stuff. I would love that, Catherine said, and Jake could see she meant it. Later that evening, after Lucy had gone home with her mother, Jake stayed to help Catherine clean up from their impromptu celebration dinner. They worked side by side in comfortable silence the way old friends do. Jake, Catherine said as they finished drying dishes, can I tell you something? Always. That night you came to fix my light, I thought it was the end of everything for me. I'd been sitting in that dark room for weeks, convinced that my life was over, that all the good parts were behind me. Jake put down the dish towel and looked at her. You changed that, she continued. Not just by fixing the light, but by seeing me. By treating me like a person instead of just a sad old widow. Catherine, let me finish. I know you think I've helped you these past months with the referrals and everything, but you saved my life that night. You reminded me that I still had something to offer, that I wasn't invisible. Jake felt tears in his eyes. You saved mine too. I was drowning when you called. Didn't know how I was going to make it through another week. Look at us now. Jake looked around the warm kitchen, thought about his growing business, his new house, Lucy's confidence, Catherine's return to painting. Yeah, look at us now. They stood there for a moment, two people who had found each other in their darkest hours and somehow managed to pull each other back into the light. So, Catherine said finally, about that foundation idea. Are you interested? Jake smiled. I'm very interested, but I have one condition. What's that? Lucy gets to design the logo. She's been working on graphic design stuff in art class. Catherine laughed. Deal. Outside, the early evening sun slanted through the windows, making everything golden. The chandelier in Catherine's bedroom glowed softly upstairs. No longer a symbol of loss, but a reminder of how broken things could be fixed, how darkness could be chased away. Jake thought about that first desperate phone call, how he'd almost said no, how close they'd both come to staying lost in their separate kinds of poverty. Money problems and heart problems, both real, both painful. But sometimes, if you're lucky, the right stranger calls at exactly the right time. Sometimes fixing one small thing leads to fixing everything else that's broken. Sometimes the light comes back on, and you remember that tomorrow might be better than today.